Voices of Slavery, An American Shame, written by Geoffrey Giuliano, narrated by Geoffrey Giuliano. Slavery in the United States was the legal institution of human chattel enslavement, primarily of African and African Americans, which existed in the United States of America in the 18th and 19th centuries. Slavery had been practiced in British America from early colonial days and was legal in all 13 colonies at the time of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. It lasted in many U.S. states almost a year beyond the end of the American Civil War, replaced for decades longer by convict leasing, peonage, or sharecropping. By the time of the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, the status of the slaves had been institutionalized as a racial caste associated with African ancestry. When the United States Constitution was ratified in 1789, a relatively small number of free people of color were amongst the voting citizens, male property owners. During and immediately following the Revolutionary War, abolitionist laws were passed in most northern states, and a movement developed to abolish slavery. Most of these states had a higher proportion of free labor than in the South, and economies based on different industries. They abolished slavery by the end of the 18th century, some with gradual systems that kept adults as slaves for 2 decades. However, the rapid expansion of the cotton industry in the Deep South after the invention of the cotton gin greatly increased demand for slave labor, and the southern states continued as slave societies. Those states attempted to extend slavery into the western territories to keep their share of political power in the nation. Southern leaders also wanted to annex Cuba to be used as slave territory. The United States became polarized over the issue of slavery, represented by the slave and free states, in effect divided by the Mason-Dixon line, which delineated free Pennsylvania from slave Maryland and Delaware. Congress during the Jefferson administration prohibited the importation of slaves effective 1808, although smuggling, illegal importing as it were, via Spanish Florida was not unusual. Domestic slave trading, however, continued at a rapid pace, driven by labor demands from the development of cotton plantations in the Deep South. More than 1 million slaves were sold from the Upper South, which had a surplus of labor, and taken to the Deep South in forced migration, splitting up families. New communities of African American culture were developed in the Deep South, and the total slave population in the South eventually reached 4 million before liberation. As the West was developed for settlement, the southern state governments wanted to keep a balance between the number of slave and free states to maintain a political balance of power in Congress. The new territories acquired from Britain, France, and Mexico were the subject of major political compromises. By 1850, the newly rich cotton-growing South was threatening to secede from the Union, and tensions continued to rise. Many white Southern Christians, including church ministers, attempted to justify their support for slavery as modified by Christian paternalism. The largest denominations, the Baptists, the Methodists, and Presbyterian churches, split over the slavery issue into regional organizations of the North and South. When Abraham Lincoln won the 1860 election on a platform of halting the expansion of slavery, 7 states broke away from the Confederacy. The first 6 states to succeed held the greatest number of slaves in the South. Shortly thereafter, the Civil War began when Confederate forces attacked the U.S. Army's Fort Sumter. 4 additional slave states then seceded. Due to Union measures such as the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, the war effectively ended slavery, even before the ratification of the 13th Amendment in December 1865 formally ended the legal institution.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?